Yo, hello. So for everybody who thought I was going to talk for 1 hour about 2.8, I have to disappoint you, because I'm going to do an introduction, and then the real heroes will show up. That's the developers who actually work on all the 2.8 stuff. We have 5 people lined up, and they will show and talk a little bit of what they've been doing. What I do is a little introduction. What is Blender 2.8? Because I think nobody has heard of this project, right? It's a surprise, Blender 2.8. So yeah, this is an ambitious new version. And it's a typical thing I like to do. I like to put down big ambitions and so let's do something amazing, right? And I think this was 3 years ago, July 2015. And we had done the Gooseberry project, Cosmos Landermaat. And it was exciting, but then you get bored again and you think, you know what? It's time to do something big with Blender again, like 2.5. Especially because a lot of topics were left alone. And there were topics, especially workflow related, that I thought should have more attention. Because everything is, in fact, about workflow. So we did for 2.5 tackle a lot of topics, and for 2.8 I wanted to tackle workflow topics, such as viewport, which is totally workflow related, layers, the OpenCL core, dependency graph. Dependency graph is a mysterious thing which is super important for Blender to be able to run. We worked in it 3 years ago already, and last year I noticed that the development, it progressed, but we only had a few people to work on it full time. And then we did the code quest, and we had suddenly 10, 12 people in the studio working on 2.8. That was so amazing. And finally, you could do things. And then, of course, the team, because of all the enthusiasm, they started adding more goals and more goals. So even though we started the code quest with an idea like, okay, let's make it feasible, right? Everybody agrees, after 3 months we have a beta. Yeah, let's do it. And then after 2 weeks, people started adding toolbars and icons and things, and it got very interesting and exciting. And let's try all that, or let's have redesigned the whole layer system. So everything became a little bit better, but more complicated. So after the code quest, it was a lot better, and we progressed a lot, but it's still not finished. Luckily, I think we can present in a couple of weeks our first beta. And after lots of testing and bug fixing, I bet somewhere in January, February, somewhere, March. Anyway, so then we will work our asses off to get the first official release to work. Which, by the way, that first 2.8 release will be there much faster if everybody massively subscribes to the Blender fund, the development fund, which will help paying for core Blender development. So if you didn't subscribe yet, do it next week. And if you see this video, subscribe, fund.blender.org. So now I'm giving the mic to the first speaker, which is William. Come in.
All right. Right, so I'd like to just briefly go over you with the status report, what we did with the user interface over the past year. Obviously, we went through a whole host of things. Lots of things have changed since 2.79, and compared to what we had before, this is our new user interface. Yeah. Yeah. This really goes to show how much things have changed over the past, years, and this gives a better idea of the typical 2.8 UI. And I'll just briefly go over different sections. So this is an example. I could just highlight a few little things for you. Like there's the toolbar on the well. First of all, there's the workspaces, which might be a little hard to see on this screen, but they give a a way to navigate through Blender in a task-oriented way, and they're ordered in terms of your typical workflow. So you start off with your layout, your modeling, your sculpting, and your other workspaces later on, your rendering and compositing and so on. This allows Blender to become a lot more task-oriented, so you can sort of use it that way. On the left, we have our new toolbar, which is thinner than the one we had before and allows for using active tools as well. We have the tool settings, always inside the user interface, so they're easy to find. We have popovers, which allows us to group related features and functionality in a way that can stay out of the way when you're not using them. We had the problem before where we'd open people's blend files and they'd have all of these editors and sub-windows open, and the viewport was just a tiny little square around in the middle of all these panels. So this allows us to open related functionality, use it, and pack it away when we're done. Then we have, obviously, our viewport gizmo, which is useful for especially tablet users, laptop users, and also beginners as well. It's a more visual way. You can directly click on things, go to different views, and so on. We have the properties editor, which now has a more structured, well-defined layout system. So you have your labels, your values, and your state indicators. In this case, you can't see them because it's the render properties, but all the animatable properties have these little state indicators. And we have now sub-panels and ways to more visually communicate the hierarchy. And of course, the outliner with color-coded icons that are themable and allows you to adjust the colors after the fact. And here in the bottom, it's a little hard to see as well, we have the status bar that shows you what happens when you click different mouse buttons, and also updates when you hold modifier keys. And of course, this is just like general to say that we've done a lot of cleanup in the different editors and headers and so on, and lots of little UI details. Next, I'd like to just briefly touch on the active tool system. This is probably one of my favorite features that have been added to Blender over the past year or so. You could say it's like a visual way to use tools, more spatial, and it allows us to focus on editing our scenes through the viewport a lot more, rather than using just the hotkeys and so on. Blender used to be a very hotkey-oriented app. In fact, at one point we didn't even have menus, so you had to learn all the hotkeys by heart to really use Blender. And now we have a much more visual way to do it without having to learn all the hotkeys, and also for laptops and other types of tablets, and also actually for professionals as well, people who are used to Blender. It allows you to modify the result of tools. I have a little video that gives sort of an example of the kinds of things that are possible. So we have updated gizmos for the basic tools, rotation. You hold control, you get the little snapping tick marks, little details like that. You have gizmos for our lamps and lights, so you can directly modify and alter the lamps in your scene. You have mesh editing tools, so there's like basic tools, extruding, inset, and you can sort of imagine how lots of different users could easily figure out how to use this to make lots of things easily. And of course, we have the ability to keep on adjusting the result and having the viewport update as you make your adjustments. This is one of my favorite, the spin gizmo, which allows you to sort of spin around things, and you can keep on updating the result and move away the basically adjust the result live, and you see things happening. This is one of the newer additions from a few weeks ago or so. Campbell added this. It's a really nice shear gizmo, which allows you to spatially shear things in the 3D view as well. So that gives a brief brief idea of the kinds of things that are possible. I also spoke to Campbell, and who's the main developer behind these active tools, and I promised to just go over just a few technical things as well. The tools are implemented in a way that sort of reference other features inside of Blender, so that you can sort of share code, share gizmos across different types of tools. And they're defined in Python, which means you can quite easily make your own tools through add-ons, and we really want to encourage add-on developers to add their own active tools. It's not something that's just baked in. It's made for extendability from the start. Yeah, they can store things for reuse later on, and they will be later on. We will add more documentation and examples of how to add your own. So I'm quite excited to see what people will do. And lastly, I want to just say that over the past year, it's been so exciting to see how everyone has been commenting, and all the suggestions and all of the live debate and that's happening on different websites. And I think we're very lucky that we have a very passionate user base. So that's that's really nice that everyone is contributing. So I want to especially thank Campbell Barton, who's not here. He's in Australia, but he's done a lot of work on this on these tools, and obviously other developers as well. Brecht is right there. So anyway, thank you for listening to it.
This is next?
That one, yes.
Yeah. Okay, hi. For the Blender 2.8 project, I worked on the viewport, and basically in the pre-Blender 2.80 project, we use an older version of OpenGL, which did not allow us to do much of the things that we are now going to be able to do in Blender 2.8. And for this is just a small showcase of let's see from what you can do for it. We created a workbench engine, something we called internally a workbench, and that was a render engine that was specifically optimized for modeling, for animation, and for sculpting. And we did it from the scratch on. So by doing that, we could look at the community and got a lot of feedback from, what do you really miss from the current Blender viewport? And we added a lot of features of that. You can load your own mud caps. We have a cavity shader. We have pixel perfect shadows, real sharp shadows. But we can also do a more we also have the option just to do no shading at all, which is for sculpting sometimes really important. We also added a feature for doing multiple to give every object a unique color in your scene. So you have a direct overview of how does your scene work, and it gives you a visual feedback of your scene, and you will be working much faster by using it. And I've seen a lot of examples already online which uses this system. But yeah, we have a workbench engine which was developed for being internal, but even artists, they use the workbench engine as a final render engine. This was created by Jan Skalls, and he even combined grease pencil and the workbench engine to create a small animation, which was really fun to see. Next thing that we were looking into was from we have the materials and and we had the cycles and the Eevee render engine, and from okay, how could we benefit from that? And what we did was from okay, cycles is in PBR renderer, Eevee is in PBR renderer. Why don't we share that and let Eevee be the material mode for cycles? So if you look into the look dev mode, it's just Eevee doing pushing the pixels. And we added some options, like you can load your own HDRI files, environment lights, and easily switch between them. So you can load your set, and like we heard this morning, it's really being used by studios to switch those HDRI files. Next to the render engine, we also needed to add more information on top of the viewport. And what we came up was an overlay system. And with that overlay system, you could add more information, and you add your tools, but you could also disable your tools. And even you can now disable your 3D cursor, which was not always possible in the older versions. But by using the new OpenGL versions, we were also able to make more information-given overlays. Like I added a face orientation overlay, which displays in blue all the normals that are facing towards the camera, and all the red are the all normals that facing away from the normal. I started opening files, and almost every file had red spots in it. So it was really fun to see from, yeah, now you can really see from, okay, there are some things that you might want to fix or not. Yes. The status of the viewport is really from it's mostly production ready. Spring is using it, and the features are really stable. Most of the development efforts is currently on supporting more hardware drivers and graphical cards. I want to give the presentation over to...
Go next, right? Okay. So first I'll talk a bit about Eevee. You know, what's there to say about Eevee? Everyone knows it. So it's basically, if people are using Blender 2.8 in production already, even if it's unstable, it's because of Eevee. And so for those who don't know what it is, it's a physically based real-time renderer. And there's kind of two purposes for it. Like, it started out, we want a better viewport where you have a PBR preview of all your materials, so you can make assets for games, or you're making assets for cycles. But it's not only that; it's also a final render. If you push up the samples, push up the quality, you can actually get really, really good-looking images. And so it supports already quite a few features. It's got the principal BSDF, it's got surface scattering, it's got volume scattering. I'm not going to list all of them because there's just too many. But it's already being used to create like a wide variety of different types of images, different types of renders and effects. And so the current status there is most of the major features are there that we will have in 2.80. There might be a few small improvements to shadow quality and things like this. But mainly the focus now is just getting it to run on all these different GPUs with their own drivers and their own weird quirks. And Clément is having a lot of fun doing that. So that's going to be the main thing. But once we release 2.80, Eevee development doesn't stop. There's still a lot that we want to improve. For example, We want to have node support for lights. If people want to use Eevee for visual effects, they want shadow catchers and render passes. We want to improve the soft shadow quality, IES lights, you name it. And so that's going to, we're going to keep improving it in later versions. Yeah, so that's Eevee. The other, big new way to create art in Blender is Grease Pencil. So originally, Grease Pencil was an annotation system where you could add like some comments on your scene or whatever for, to just give some information about what's in the shot or whatever, or what needs to change. But it grew into like an actual 2D animation system. And at some point, it was decided, it deserves its own dedicated object type, its own dedicated template, where you can, just really focus on doing 2D animation. And so now there's a separate annotation system, and there's the new Grease Pencil object type, and it's really powerful. You can do, it has modifiers, you can do character deformation, you can do all kinds of effects on your 2D drawings. You can add shadows, you can add rim lighting, you can do all kinds of stuff. And this was initially mainly tested during the Hero Open Movie project, where it was validated that you can actually make a 2D animated movie in Blender now, and it's been improving ever since. Like there's always new model improvements. It just keeps improving all the time. And so for the 2.8, the current status is, I think it's in a pretty good state. The only thing that will probably change still is the way tools and brushes work together, and there might be some new features, but it's in a pretty good state for 2.8. Okay, and so you might almost forget there's still cycles, but this isn't necessarily a 2.8 project in the sense that cycles development kind of continues on regardless of 2.8 or whatever. It just, there's a bunch of developers working on it continuously. And so we have a bunch of new features that have been already in the daily builds for a long time, but they haven't been in an official release yet. And so the two most obvious ones are the new principled hair shader and the principled volume shader, which kind of completes our principled set. Maybe we'll have one or two more in the future, but that already allows you to sort of shade any kind of surface with like an easy-to-use shader node, which is much easier than before. We've got a bunch of other new shaders, ambient occlusion, a bevel shader, and lots of texture shaders. And then there's also been performance improvements. You can do CPU plus GPU rendering. You can use your CPU memory from your GPU. I'm not going to list it all, but so all this stuff will be in the 2.80 release as well. And so the last feature I'm going to talk about is collections. And so this is really an important feature in 2.8. We've had the old layer system for a long time. This is like one of the things that people have been asking for 15 years or something, I don't know how long, to get a more powerful layer system. And the old one was actually really clever, and it's nice little 20 buttons. It's really quick and compact, and it's also limited, of course. You couldn't name your layers, you couldn't nest your layers. There was a limit on the number of layers. So what we have now is a new collection system that replaces both layers and groups. And so as you can see in the screenshot, for example, you can have your collections and your objects in them, and you can name them however you want. You can nest them however you want. And there's two ways to edit them. Like you can edit them and view them in the outliner, which is like where you get the most clear overview of where all your objects are and all your collections. But you can also still continue to edit them in the 3D viewport. The old M key to move to layer, that still works. It looks a little different, but it's still a really quick way to work with layers without having to go to the outliner. We're still doing some UI improvements to make working with collections really efficient in the 3D view. At the moment, you kind of have to do a lot of stuff still in the outliner, and we're kind of having to figure out how exactly, to get this more powerful system as user-friendly as the old, or as quick at least as the old layer system was, even if it's more complicated. And the other big thing about the new collections is that they are linkable. So they replace group as the way to link objects into other files, or a group of objects into other files. And with this new architecture, I think it's going to be easier to understand how you link a group of objects between files, and it's also going to be more powerful once we combine it with overrides. So what you used to have to do is you had the layers in your local file, and then you had to create groups on top of them, and then those got linked in, and it was like you had kind of two systems, and it wasn't always clear how they related. And now you can take like a collection from your scene, transplant it into another scene, and it's sort of more clear what gets linked over. And once we have overrides, you can also then go into the collection and make modifications for for each scene, where maybe you want to have a background shot that's shared for all your scenes, but then maybe you want to tweak it. And Bastien is going to talk about that in more detail. So yeah, that's it for collections. In terms of the status for 2.8, it's mostly there, but again, it's mostly the user interface that we still have to fine-tune. Yeah, thank you.
Hello, so I'm Bastien Montagne, and I'm going to talk about library overrides and yeah. So that's a project that won't be in the initial 2.80 release because I basically didn't have time to finish it, and it's not tested enough and not polished enough to be ready for the 2.80. It should be ready for 2.81, hopefully. So the main goal was to replace proxies, because we all know proxies. They have been in beta for a long time. They have been working, mostly, but they have, come on, to survive how much, 15 years? Yeah, so they've been working. But they have a lot of limitations. The main one being that you can only have one proxy of a given character in a blend file. The goal was also to give more possibilities, because library overrides will allow you to create overrides not only of characters or armatures, but also of materials, node trees. Pretty much any data block can be overridden at some point. But of course, you won't be able to override everything. For example, you do not want to override the mesh geometry itself, because it's much simpler to just create a local copy and then edit it yourself if you want. It's just way too heavy to make the comparison between the original mesh and the overridden one. It would take seconds to compare every time, so it's not an option. I switch to OK. I missed the first slide. So yes, the override is based in two different kinds. We have the library overrides on one hand, which is to replace proxies, and it's only applicable on linked data block. That means you cannot override local ones. On the other hand, it's much more powerful, because you can override much more things in library overrides. You can even, for example, add modifiers or add new constraints. You can define new animation for them. So it's really proxies, but extended a bit in possibilities. On the other hand, we have the view layer overrides, which have a bit different goal, because they're just going to make small changes to existing data blocks. But on the other side, they are evaluated at runtime, which means that, for example, you can, on your local material, you can decide to switch the colors to something else if you need, for example, a variation, or to visualize something very well. And it will happen immediately, even on a local data block. So it's kind of two different tools which are using the same logic in the same behind. And yes, they are defined on the view layers level currently, most only. So that we saw. And yes, it was mostly on the status. So I won't do it again, but you know what we say about the last 10%. The main points that remain to be tackled are performances, because when you are overriding a rig, for example, which has hundreds of bones, and you need to go and make the comparison between the original linked data block and the local override on one, you have to compare the whole tree of bones, all the status, all the position, location, all the properties, everything that is overridable needs to be compared, and that takes some time. So there's work to be done here. And we also have to work, like iron out, of course, a lot of corner cases, non-bugs. There's also a bit of work to be done on the UI. So that was for library overrides, and the view layer overrides, which I worked a bit on it, but it was mostly work from Dalai Felinto, which was the Brazilian developer that has been working on Blender for a long time and was here for the CodeQuest. And well, kind of the same issue a bit. The basics are here, but we still need a lot of work to get it polished and ready to use in a usable state. And that's pretty much it. Now, it's time for Sergey.
Hello. Well, let's talk about something boring, which nobody understands, like dependency graph. So there is like a lot of work done under the hood, which quite hard to present in a good way. So basically, the new dependency graph, which is actually 5 years old, is now enabled by default, and the old dependency graph is completely removed. No way back. I know, tough life. What this basically allows you to do is to have more complicated rig setups with all those interbound to both to other object back to the another object to some custom property back to your rig relations. It's nothing to do with the performance. Since 2012, all the evaluations multi-threaded and all dependency graphs. In fact, with new dependency graph, it's more tricky to have good performance because there is way more functions to be called. But we're getting to there. So this has led us to do a lot of optimizations in the way how we talk to the CPU, how we do multi-threading, boiling down under the hood to basically allow us to be scalable as much as possible to all the cores you have in your computer, because nowadays having 32 cores is quite normal. We also have new expression evaluation done by Alexander Gavrilov, which allowed us to ditch Python for simple expression evaluations, which allowed us to evaluate all the drivers in all the cores available without having any threading locks, which gave us about 30% speed up of some of the Spring rigs, which is quite impressive. Anyway, we also now storing a lot more of dependency graphs now. Every render engine have its own dependency graph, this includes viewport, this includes cycles, Eevee, whatnot. This allows us to completely separate data set between different representations for data, which solves all threading conflict between viewport and render when hit F12. This allows us such things as multi-threaded synchronizations of objects from Blender to cycles, because this is the only single-threaded operation which is happening now when you hit F12 in cycles, and it could take like more than your render time actually. This is also a crucial bit to have view layer overlays to work, so you can have different same object appearing different in different view layers. And one of the things which you're also moving towards is to have an animation preview playing back in one window, while you can have tweaks enabled in another window. So we edit stuff in one window while animation is playing in another window. So from quick test, it seems to work, but there is a lot of work to be done to stabilize it and make it more understandable user interface for this. That concludes the dependency graph. So let's talk about something less boring, which is OpenSubdiff. So basically, the work we did in the past month was related on replacing all subdivision surface code with open subdiv for both subdivision surface modifier and multi-res modifier in the modifier stack in any location on the modifier stack. So it's all done on CPU, but it's perfectly threadable. And because it's open subdiv, it allows to have faster playback when topology doesn't change. It also allows us to have Blender more compatible with a heterogeneous pipeline where we can have different ways of how different software interpolates UVs or handles creases and whatnot. And speaking of creases, this brings better crease support for edges, and it brings ability to support vertex crease when you can have like some pinchy things in the vertex. And one of the things which you also switch to immediately is feature adaptive subdivisions when you spend more time in trying to subdivide things where there's some complicated features on the model. And for the multi-res, it should solve the old sanding bug where you sculpt on one of the layers, go to the higher level, and all of a sudden we have a spiky thing because tangents were just approximately calculated. Now we have proper tangents calculated, so it should solve this issue. And there is, yes, it's actually hard to demonstrate a good crease support and a still image, and especially some existing model where artists just started adding all those edge loops to compensate for bad creases. But yeah, I think that concludes my part. There is, oh, okay, so there were some last-minute tweaks of the presentation. So it is tested by Spring team in a production. There is some little things to be figured out still, but mostly it works and waits for us to enable it for everybody on the build bot after the conference when we are back to regular support mode. And accelerated GPU support will come later during 2.8 series releases. So it's not forgotten, it will be back and it'll be good. And now I'm pretty sure it's all for me.
So as the last part of the presentation, I'll quickly talk about the roadmap. Where are we going? As Ton already mentioned, we'll probably have a beta in 2 weeks somewhere. Don't have an exact date, but that's what we're aiming for. And this one should have all the major features. After this, we don't want to have like big changes anymore. Add-ons can start porting to 2.8, documentation writing, all this stuff can start. And we're going to be focusing on bug fixing for quite a while. And then we're going to have 2.80 stable somewhere later. I put early 2019 there. I don't have an exact date, but that's what we're estimating, like maybe 4 months from now. But we release it when it's stable. And then after that, that's quite a while away, but after that we want to get back to doing frequent releases instead of having like about 1.5 years between the other one, the previous 2.79 and now. We want to go back to doing more frequent releases, and that will include a bunch of stuff. One is just finishing all the stuff that we didn't get in 2.80, like the overrides and the asset manager. I think those are the two big ones that will not be in 2.80. And there's, of course, a lot of other polishing that we can do on the new 2.80 functionality, lots of tweaking based on feedback. And then there are 2 major projects that are at this moment in early planning, maybe a little bit of code written, that we're really going to be focusing on. Like one is the interactive mode, which is a way to more interactively work with physics in the viewport, and it will also have a logic system. It's not a full game engine, but it's a way to make interactive content in Blender. And the other thing is this big name everything nodes, which includes a lot of different things for different people. But the main thing is we want to have more powerful tool sets for modeling and particles animation, and we think adding node-based support and reevaluating how those areas work is going to make it a lot more powerful. And so that's what we're calling everything now, is having a refresh of like the procedural modeling of particles, of animation, maybe rigging nodes. And so that's something I expect that will be sort of rolling out slowly, like one area at a time, maybe in the 2.81, 82, 83. And then there's also, of course, lots of other stuff we could be working on. And for that, I think we want to really be listening to the community. So I made a blog post on the code.blender.org asking for feedback on what you want. If you have specific ideas about, like, really think this should be the priority, mention it there. And over the coming months, we're reading all this stuff and thinking, about all the stuff that we're going to add. And of course, the more people we have supporting the development fund, the more we can do this kind of stuff. So yeah. That's it for me. Thanks all for listening.